We are.
Good morning. My name is Stacy Hawk. I'm the Vice Chair of the Committee on Innovation, Data, and Education and Analytics. It is 9 a.m. and I'd like to call the July 24th, 2024 committee meeting to order. Before we get started, I'll just share that this meeting is being held via live broadcast, and we want to take the opportunity to welcome those joining us via video conference and ask that you observe the following etiquette. Please state your name before you speak, mute your phone when not speaking, and keep background noise to a minimum. Members, when I call your name, please announce present. Stacy Hawk, Vice Chair present. Richard Clemmer.
Present.
Fred Farars.
Present.
Juan Navarez. Welcome Wilson. Daniel Wong. Present. Luke Schwartz. Please record in the minutes that we have a quorum. Before we go further, I'd like to hand it over to Chairman Frias for some comments.
Thank you, Ms. Hawk. Before we start today's committee meetings, I would like to make an announcement that the governor has appointed 2 new members to our board, Juan Navarez and our new student board member, Luke Schwartz. So we welcome you. I'll formally introduce them to you tomorrow at the board meeting with their background. And so next, I would like to announce that effective June 17th, 2024, I made the following committee appointments. For the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success, I assigned Emma Walschlager as the chair, Daniel Wong as the vice chair, and Javed Anwar, Stacy Hawk, Ashley Thomas, and myself as committee members. For the Committee on Innovation, Data, and Educational Analytics, Javed Anwar remains the chair with Stacy Hawk as vice chair. And the committee members on that committee are Richard Clemmer, Juan Navarez, Welcome Wilson, Daniel Wong, and myself as committee members. For the Agency and Operations Committee, I've assigned Welcome Wilson as chair, Richard Clemmer as vice chair, and Juan Navarez, Ashley Thomas, Emma Walschlager, and myself as committee members. Additionally, Luke Schwartz, our student member, has been assigned as ex officio member for all 3 committees.
Thank you. Agenda item 2 is consideration and possible action to approve the minutes from the April 24th, 2024 committee meeting. Members, do I have a motion for the approval of the minutes? I have a motion made by Daniel Wong. A second?
Rick Clemmer.
Thank you. A second made by Mr. Clemmer. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye. Any opposed say no. Motion passes. Agenda item 3 is public testimony on the agenda items relating to the Committee on Innovation, Data, and Educational Analytics. We do not have anyone registered to testify, so we'll go to the next item. Agenda item 4 is consideration and possible action to approve the consent calendar. The consent calendar includes items that can be approved without comment or discussion. This allows us to save time for other items that need more of our attention. The consent items are the highlighted items in gray on the agenda. We're going to vote on the consent items in two votes, non-rule items and rule items. Members, the following is on the non-rule consent calendar for consideration. 5E, consideration and possible action to approve the appointment of members to the Financial Aid Advisory Committee. 5F, consideration and possible action to approve faculty salary increase report. 5G, consideration and possible action to approve the report on student financial aid in Texas higher education fiscal year 2023. Members, does anyone have or want to remove any items from the non-rule consent calendar? Does anyone have anything they want to add? Is there a motion to approve the non-rule consent items? I have a motion by Dr. Frias, a second. Thank you, Dr. Wong. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Members, next we will vote on the rule consent items. These rules are either technical, conforming, or implement non-controversial policies around which there is consensus. The following rule item is on consent for consideration. 5H1, consideration and possible action to adopt proposed amendments to board rules, Chapter 13, Subchapter Q, Sections 13-501 through 503, concerning the financial aid for Swift Transfer, FAST program. 5H2, consideration and possible action to adopt proposed amendments to board rules, Chapter 13, Subchapter R, Sections 13-522 through 525, and 13-528 through 529, concerning audit and reporting provisions related to community college finance. 5H4, consideration and possible action to repeal board rules, Chapter 13, Subchapter S, Sections 13-560 through 562, concerning formula transition funding, payment schedules, and limitations on spending. 5H8, consideration and possible action to adopt new board rules, Chapter 23, Subchapter A, Sections 23-1 through 3, concerning general provisions. 5H9, consideration and possible action to adopt amendments to board rules, Chapter 23, Subchapter G, Sections 23-187 through 189 and 23-193, and new Section 23-190 concerning the Nursing Faculty Loan Repayment Assistance Program. 5H10, consideration and possible action to adopt the repeal of board rules, Chapter 23, Subchapter G, Sections 23-190 through 92 and 23-194 concerning the Nursing Faculty Loan Repayment Assistance Program. Members, does anyone want to remove any rules from the consent calendar? Or add any rules to the consent calendar? Is there a motion to approve the rule consent item?
Motion.
I have a motion by Dr. Wong. Second? I have a second by Mr. Clemmer. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye. Any opposed say no.
Aye.
Motion passes. Agenda item 5A is Building a Talent Strong Texas Data Insight Data Modernization Initiative. Dr. David Troutman, Deputy Commissioner for Academic Affairs, and Sarah Keaton, Deputy Commissioner for Administration, will provide a presentation and be available to answer questions. This item is for information only.
Good morning. I'm David Troutman. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Academic Affairs, and with me I have. And so we want to thank you for providing us the opportunity to provide you an update of where we're at with our DMI effort. I first want to acknowledge, and we want to acknowledge and thank Commissioner Keller for supporting our efforts to move the needle on how we're using data at the agency and how we're using data across the state of Texas. And so today we're going to just highlight some of the things that we've been doing. When I say we, Sarah and I are the executive sponsors for this initiative. but there are so many divisions and so many team members at the coordinating board that help create and bring this to life. I also want to acknowledge that there are several individuals in the field that help support and enhance what we're doing. We cannot work in a black box. We have to work and engage with stakeholders to make sure we're meeting their needs. So we want to thank you for that. And I think also, before we jump into it, I think Sarah and I want to acknowledge that she and I are trying to change the culture at the agency when it comes to data. It might be an initiative, but honestly, I view it, DMI is actually part of our DNA now. And it's something that we do on a daily basis. And so we're really excited to share with you this information. Next slide. And so what Sarah and I have tried to do is we've tried to create a North Star of how we're trying to strive towards excellence when it comes to DMI. And one is making sure that we have clear presentation. We could create a structure, we could create dashboards, we could create information, but if it has ambiguity, if it's unclear, then honestly, it's useless. So we are ensuring that we are meeting the needs of our stakeholders by making sure that they see themselves in these data and how they could use it effectively. And that's our second point, is actionable information. We want to provide timely and meaningful information to our stakeholders so that they can create positive change on their campuses. And in doing so, as we go through, we're constantly engaging with our stakeholders to make sure that we are pointing in the right direction and we have the accurate North Star that we're striving towards. So I'll turn it over to Sarah to talk about our roadmap, and then we'll get into some details about what we're doing in DMI.
Sure. Moving on to the next slide. When I think about DMI and kind of what is DMI and what does that mean, I really think about sort of three pillars. We have how we take data in from institutions, how we store that data, and then how we reflect that data back to stakeholders and decision makers. So kind of following that structure, this is sort of information on those three pillars for where we are sort of current state and where we're going in the future. So in terms of how we take data in, how institutions submit data to us, we are completing our transition to a cloud-based system. We're using Snowflake for all of our data collections so that all of the data we collect will be integrated into that system. We are, as David said, working closely with the field for rolling that out, training, supporting institutions as we make those changes. In terms of how we're storing data, that second bullet, we're storing data in what we call data hubs. So that's sort of how we're organizing the information internally so that we can provision it out as quickly as possible. And then in terms of provisioning, how we're reflecting that data back to institutions, we are really focused on producing stakeholder-informed products. So not producing products for the sake of producing them, but for producing things that are useful for our stakeholders and decision. And then continuing to work closely with the tri-agency and collaborating with both TEA and Workforce Commission on data sharing and working with all of them on those data products. So moving on to slide 4, to talk a little bit about sort of what we've done and how we've gotten to where we are now that informs those future plans. So this slide has a lot of kind of technical information about our Snowflake implementation, but what I really want to focus on is sort of why did we do this? So we did this large Snowflake implementation project, not for the sake of doing a large technology project, but for the sake of being the best version of a partner, resource, and advocate for institutions of higher education that we can be. So what this Snowflake implementation has allowed us to do is to have a new data storage system completely in the cloud, more secure, making sure that we're protecting all of this data in all the ways that we need to be, creating a private network to easily share data. And again, part of that is with TEA and TWC on our tri-agency efforts, a well-organized structure to store and analyze this very large amount of data that we have, and then linking all of the data systems for better reporting and insights. So being able to produce things faster and produce things that are more meaningful. So that's why we've engaged or worked on this large Snowflake implementation project. Moving on to the next slide. this is a little more information around the infrastructure work around data submission. So this has got information on sort of the technical aspects of what we've done around data submission, but again, really focusing on why have we done that? We've done this data submission work to create a system that is more intuitive for institutions to use, provides them immediate feedback on their submissions, and includes automated checks for accuracy. So as institutions go in, they're getting real-time feedback on what they're submitting. And moving forward into the rest of the presentation, David's going to walk you through some of that user-focused design that we've engaged in, and then kind of show you what some of these products actually look like for the field.
Can I ask real quick question before we go on?
Absolutely.
You talk about the tri-agency share data sharing. How much data sharing we're talking about? Is it like we want to access certain data, we'll just go to Texas Workforce Commission and say, we want to have that data and then ask the permission so that they can share with us? Or you can directly kind of like get in and share the data together?
That's a great question. So with our updated agreement with our tri-agency, we have created a line of sight that communicates. So if we're interested in using, let's say, unemployment insurance wage records from TWC, we reach out to them and we're saying, we would like to use it for this purpose, and they approve or not approve. We haven't had anything disapproved or not approved yet. So same thing with TEA and vice versa. It's just good data stewardship to make sure that we are always on the same page about how we're using these data. Because ultimately, if we're using UI wage records, TWC is going to get questions. And so at least they know exactly the intentionality of how we're using those data. And then I lead the tri-agency data group. We meet every other week, and we're trying to discuss common problems across 3 agencies and how we can use data to solve those problems. So it's really, I'm excited about how we're having these conversations and the willingness of all 3 agencies to share data with each other.
So if I could weigh in just for context a little bit. So if we go back a few years ago, we didn't really have any data sharing agreement across the 3 agencies. So one of our key initiatives in the governor's tri-agency initiative was to set up a new data governance and data sharing agreement. So we have a master data sharing agreement, and then we keep track of all of the specific projects that we're working on together. Just in practice, what had happened was there was data, say, that we might need or TEA might need that we didn't have easy access to, and we didn't actually have an agreement in place and the legal structures that we needed to be able to readily share that data. So there was a ton of policy work, a lot of work across our general counsel's offices to get to, where now we've got clear data governance and then this regular heartbeat of communication across the 3 agencies. So we've got much easier mechanisms for sharing data across the agencies than we had before.
Next slide. And so I want to just briefly talk about user-focused enhancements that we're striving towards. We'll first talk about the public data website. So that's going to be DataBridge. And I want to acknowledge multiple individuals, but specifically Associate Commissioner Marjorie Barrett and her team, to really thinking through the different types of data narratives or narrative arcs that exist on DataBridge. She's really championed that with in collaboration with ISS and DMR, our data team. And then with our strategic planning for the future, I want to acknowledge Melissa Henderson from the foundation and also the chief of staff for our agency. She has really been working with the foundation to work with a consultant to think about strategic planning about where we go in the future. And it's allowed us the headspace to think through the impacts of our current day issues and trends, similar to thinking of AI and how that impacts how we translate data out to our public facing. And then it's also engaging different types of stakeholders, whether it be institutional researchers, provosts, the general public, students, and parents. So without them, we would really be exploring in the dark, per se. And then we launched our T3, and we've just updated it, and I'll share some updates based on how we've enhanced that tool. And then on the right side, we talk about our secure data portal, and I'll show you some images. I took a snapshot instead of doing interactive, just, based on technology gods and whether or not they'll work with me today. So I'll show you some of the different things that we're doing visually for our stakeholders. We've engaged multiple partners, IR, Student Success, Provost. We have a dashboard advisory council that's made up of both 2-year and 4-year representatives. They meet monthly to discuss the needs and wants from that advisory group. And then currently we have 101, I call power users from 52 institutions. So those individuals have been approved to access very granular data. Very granular data. We've never done that in the history of our agency before. And so we're creating this online modules that will help them understand graduation, persistence, transfer rates, and also labor markets. And I'll talk about those in just a second. So next slide. Sarah was discussing our data submission process. Sometimes it's just easier to see what others are experiencing. And so this is just a snapshot. So let's say that Jamie is from an institution and he wants to submit data to the coordinating board. We have put behind the scenes, it's much more complex than what we're seeing here. So we have various different logic checks associated with all the data that are submitted to us. So when Jamie goes in and hits submit, it will automatically tell him if he has any data errors. Before, it would take up to 2 weeks for our staff to review the data. And then we would email them and then schedule a time to meet. And then it would just be back and forth, back and forth. And it could take up to 2 months to clean and get accurate data. This way, Jamie goes into the portal, hits submit on their data. Our logic checks automatically check it. It can take around 60 to 90 seconds. And then he will get a report back that says, okay, the things you've submitted are normal range, there's some questionable range, and then there's actually some error in your data. And that way, he automatically knows what areas and what variables of interest have error. And then we can engage with him automatically, virtually, and say, how can I help? How can I help you correct these data? And then they can resubmit, and it can take just a matter of hours versus weeks in the past. So it's really exciting. And so Sarah and I are championing that. Our goal is to have all data reports, our data submission reports, active with logic checks and fully functioning within 12 months. Really exciting stuff. I know it doesn't look exciting, but it is exciting. Next slide. I promise. So T3, I want to update you on T3. So this is our Texas Talent Trajectory Dashboard. So it was formerly known as our 8th grade cohort. It's a very popular report. Next slide. And so what we've done with this is we've been able to incorporate National Clearinghouse data to understand who's leaving the state. So I had the opportunity to present to you all, I think 2 board meetings ago about T3, and we had a blind spot. Our blind spot is we didn't have data on those who are leaving the state, and now we do. So it's really exciting because we have to keep a pulse on all the different non-Texas institutions that are recruiting our students away from Texas. And so right now, what we see when you look across statewide, we see around 11% of our students leave the state to enroll in a non-Texas school. 11%. We're going to really keep an eye on that and update you as we go, as we introduce new cohorts of students to make sure that, is it going to stay at 11%? I don't know, but we will make sure that you are always informed about that metric. And then more than 1 in 4 students don't even attempt to go to college. 1 in 4. So we have to figure out how we can engage with those students with My Texas Future, engage with adult learners, and engage with some college no credential so that they can figure out a way, and how we can help them figure out a way to receive some type of credential value that will help them in the workforce. And then also I want to acknowledge that these percentages will vary greatly by region, by county, district, high school campus, and student characteristics. Next slide.
Could I ask a question about that before you leave that slide?
I have a question.
Of course.
Oh, Mr. Clemmer, I'll
Does
let
that
you go
include
first.
community?
His
This is
question
Rick
is,
Clemmer. Does that include community colleges in the college?
Yes, sir.
Definition?
So yes, we have with the National Clearinghouse data, we can account for around 97% of all institutions in the country now. The percentages that aren't accounted for are sometimes cosmetology and other types of trades that aren't a part of the National Clearinghouse. But you know, I'll figure out a way to figure out how we can get capture those students as well. But right now we're able to see almost all of our population. So yes, it includes the 2 years. And I'll show an image in next slide that will show.
Can I ask a quick question on that slide, please?
Yeah.
Dr. Troutman, on the 10.7% of students attending non-Texas institutions, are we keeping track of those that come back to Texas?
So that's yes. So we're going to so what I try to do is I try to phase out a dashboard so we introduce new topics, and then over time the roadmap will be, did they come back in? How much are they earning? And what industries are they working in?
Okay.
But
good.
yes.
Good.
Next slide. And so what you can see here is this is live. So you can go out to our website, to Data Bridge, and click on 8th grade cohort, and it will provide you this module that you can go through and explore. There are several different filters. You can look at the different regions of the state, or you can look at it statewide. You can focus on a county. You can focus on a district. You can focus on a high school campus, and you can also disaggregate by economic status, race, ethnicity, and gender. And so what you're seeing here is a statewide measure or a statewide analysis. I didn't create any filters at all. And what this is showing you is that when you look at the pipeline, we see around out of the 876,000 students who graduate. So this is a 3-year cohort. So this isn't one graduating class. This is 3 graduating classes. The reason why we do that is to ensure that we can disclose the information, because at certain points we have to put NA and we can't disclose it. It could potentially identify the student. So we do a 3-year panel. And so with that said, out of that 3-year panel, around 540,000 students attempt to go to college, either 2-year or 4-year in Texas. We see that around 94% of students, or I'm sorry, 94,000 students enroll in an out-of-state college. And we see from those 3 cohorts, almost 250,000 students that don't even attempt to go to college. So it's a missed opportunity there. And as you can see, it flows down to really figure out enrollment. And then ultimately, did they graduate from either a 2-year or a 4-year degree? So Chairman, when you were talking about, did they go back in? We're going to figure out a way to, with this flow, to figure out how we can reintroduce those students who left the state and figure out how much they're earning. And that will be to the right of the chart. The complicated thing is figuring out, when is it too much information to share? Or is there an opportunity to create a new module to figure out migration patterns and employment rates? But it's just really, it's exciting to see that we have that information. And then what I've done is I provide an example, next slide, of trying to filter out and look at a high school in Texas. This high school is a school from a small town outside a large city. And so what this is showing you is it's really trying to demonstrate the percent that are even trying to go to college and how that may differ from another high school. So for example, this group of students, 56% of the students attempt to go to either a 2-year or 4-year. Close to 10% enroll outside of outside of Texas, and then 34% are not enrolled. And then what I did in the next slide, please, I compared and contrast that to a magnet school that is from a large suburban area. And you can quickly start seeing that when you look at those who are migrating outside the state, 37% of their students go to a school that's a non-Texas school, 37% compared to 11%. And then with this school, only 5% do not attempt to go to college, 5%. And as you can see, my dream is that all high schools would look like this, where we have a much larger pipeline that goes straight towards either an associate's or a bachelor's degree. As you can see with the previous slide, those bachelors was a much smaller rate. And so, yeah, we have to figure out ways of how we can support students as they're going through this journey, so they can see themselves as a college student and succeed. Next slide. And then what I did was I created a mirror image of looking at non-economically disadvantaged versus economically disadvantaged for a very large region in Texas. And as you can start seeing very quickly, and I apologize for the confusions of the colors. That's an automatic thing that changes. But just know that, when we look at non-economically disadvantaged, around 15% of the students in that region, they enroll out of state. Around 14% are not found enrolled anywhere. Contrast that with economic disadvantage, 32% of those students, so a third of those students don't even attempt to go to college, a third. So it really shows you that income proxy on agency and how we can support students as they're wanting to explore or deciding about college. And then you can start seeing at the very end how income really does have an impact on success. There's a much smaller number of students that are receiving some type of credential at the end compared to those who are not economically disadvantaged. Next slide. So I want to talk about sort of the secure data portal that we have. Next slide. So once again, there are 51 campuses that are engaging with us on this. So this is a FERPA secured website. You have to go in, you log in, and then you have to receive approval to have access to these data. The reason why we do that is because you could potentially violate FERPA by very small cell sizes. So we want to make sure that we're always compliant with the federal government and state government on exploring data. So next slide. Of course.
So this is great data and all. So I guess it's up to the institutions and the community colleges to go out and provide opportunities for these students. Because I mean, the data is here. We provide the data. We do not do scholarships and do policy in terms of how do we reach that pool of students. We just provide the data. So I think the institutions, how do we get this to the institutions and how do they analyze the data? And what is the plan? Or, it really, the goal is for them to look at this data and provide opportunities for students to close the gap. And so do we get a report back from them? Do they visit with you and your committee?
Yes. Yeah. So we are really engaging with stakeholders. We've taken a multi-prong approach where we have conversations and meet with provosts, so executive officers of institutions. We meet with student success champions. We meet with IR. We have to interact with all ranges of employees because we have to make sure that it becomes part of their culture.
So,
And yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, so what I've found is when I like this kind of data is especially powerful with presentations, say to chambers of commerce or when some of the regional groups that are working on educational attainment. This is again, just to remind the board whether whoever the commissioner is, as one of my mentors used to say, everyone loves you until you have findings, right? And so what we have here lets you drill down to individual middle schools, lets you drill down to individual high schools. And you can also disaggregate and see what happens to the boys versus the girls, or you can see the kids who are economically disadvantaged versus not economically disadvantaged. So, we're in a time where there's more and more attention to college, career, and military readiness. Although there's ongoing litigation about ratings for schools and that kind of thing. This is just descriptive statistics. This is just what's happening to the students as they go through the pipeline. And the contrast with particular schools, the contrast within regions about different student demographics, this is, in some cases, it's pretty profound differences. And so this, even with some of these new additions and being able to see students who go out of state or not, we're accounting for the vast majority of the students and what the pathways look like. As this starts to get more attention, especially going into the fall and coming into this legislative session, I'm sure you all are going to hear about it. right? From your your home communities, from your constituents, from folks you talk to. But it does shine a light on what the pipeline actually looks like within different regions, within different school districts, even within and from individual campuses.
Well, and it's also so I have an example. So I went down to Houston and met with a group, and I know Lee Rector as well has gone down and really tried to use T3 to understand basic needs of students, homelessness. There's just other ways you can use these data to really create a triage for a community, and that's what excites me. And over time, we're going to build more and more case studies of that and share that out to individuals and individual communities to figure out how we can have that impact. The other thing that's powerful is that we have to acknowledge we have the full census. We have the entire piece of the pie. We have the opportunity to shine that light and understand what's happening to students on that entire population. And that's what I say at the very beginning. It's part of our DNA. We have to think through how we're using these data for action, whether it be with student success, whether it be funding, whether it be digital learning. All of our divisions in the agency are really trying to push this forward to make sure that people have data in their fingertips so they can use it positively.
Yeah, I think I was just to add to that, I think as David talks about sort of infusing this data mindset into our agency. And so later today, we'll be talking about our legislative appropriations request. So certainly that is data informed, you know, as we think about what to take as ideas or options to the legislature, it's informed by all of the data analysis that we're doing.
Dr. Trauman, I'll just comment one. I really always so appreciate the data, and it's exciting to be able to see the out-of-state numbers now. So thank you for that. And I love that we are bringing transparency, you know, and quality to the data so that people can be informed. I think that's where you start. It would be nice to, at some point, also be, obviously we look through the lens of higher ed, but it would be nice if Workforce Commission in the tri-agency effort had some line of sight to the quarter of students who aren't enrolling in higher ed, you know, what does that military and career, you know, enrollment look like? What do those paths look like? And, you know, having a niece who just graduated and is going to become an esthetician, you know, she's not in these, I mean, you know, that's not transparent either. And so anyway, for what it's worth, I think without casting judgment necessarily on, you know, folks who are choosing alternative paths, it'd be good to know a little bit of what that looks like. But this is wonderful. Thank you. Oh, and my question also was, how does the public access this report, this dashboard?
So the T3, so it's publicly available right now. So go to databridge.highered.texas.gov.
Great.
I didn't want Marjorie to kill me.
It is. Okay. It is linked from the
Yeah,
main page.
it's-
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a link. You could Google THCB T3 and it will come up.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you bring up an excellent point, Ms. Hawk. This is allowing us to drill down deeper so that now we can sort out those who have left the state. We can actually see, did they go public? Did they go private? Are they in the surrounding states? But then the 25%, what does that population look like? And then the other thing that we'll be very respectful on, we can explore their earnings outcomes. So we can tie the UI wage records to those students who decide not to go to college and understand, are they making $75,000? Probably not, but good for them if they are. But we can sort through and triage. Yeah. So with the secure data portal, this is just an instance that we had talked to you about before. We have 3 secure dashboards right now. We have persistence and graduation, we have transfer, and we have labor market insights. So next slide. So what has to happen is an individual from an institution submits a request to us to gain access to these data. We review their credentials to make sure that they are employed at that institution and the intent for why they want to use these data, and then we approve them access. So as you can see with this slide, this is our persistence and graduation dashboard. So on the the left side, you can choose your institution. So for us, we have access to all institutions. So this is just my module. But on the right side, you can select your peer. And you can really compare and contrast both persistence and graduation, time to degree, just a variety of different metrics to really understand how are you doing against the other institutions you compare yourselves with or you aspire to become. And I think that's really part of the power of the coordinating board. We're coordinating the data so that you can do peer comparisons. Next slide. And so as you can see, I've clicked on the institution. And so the right side also has this, but you can identify what institution you want to view. So I have access to everybody's, but this, if I was at, let's say UT Austin, I would only see UT Austin on the left side. On the right side, I can compare and contrast against all. And this is all on the right side, it's going to be aggregated. So we're not violating FERPA, but you're going to have information about persistence and graduation. Next slide. So and this just provides you for your graduation rates by program. You can start getting really granular in the information to understand, are they graduating 3, 4, 5, or 6 years? You also have a series of filters. So this is filtering on engineering, and this is across the state. This is a state metric, and you can understand our production of engineers and the percent that are receiving those degrees. You can filter on age, you can filter on gender, you can filter on race, ethnicity, and you can also filter on GPA. So there's a lot of information here. Next slide. And so this provides us the next dashboard, which is the transfer. That's something we really want to make sure that we keep an eye on with transfer students and figuring out the success of both transfer in, peer transfer in, GPA. I've not created any filters on this. That's why they're identical numbers, but it just shows you as a state average with our transfer rates for the last 5 cohorts, we had over 658,000 transfer students. They had an average GPA of 2.82, and they had on average around 35 semester credit hours before they transferred to a 4-year institution. So it's really helpful information. And this really helps us shine a light also of figuring out with our goals with Map My Path and recommended course sequencing, do those 35 hours, do they apply to a degree? And we have to understand that, because it's a shame if a student transfers and they only get credit for 18 hours. And then maybe those additional hours might be deemed as electives. So it just,
Do we have a way to track that? Can we track that at this point?
We're on the cusp of tracking it. So we have had a data request to our campuses on recommended course sequencing. So basically, what are the courses that students have to take at a given semester to receive that degree at that institution? Right now, we have 50% of all institutions with accurate data with our with this. Now we can overlay that information with the information we have to truly understand who's on track, who's off track, who's not receiving the credits that are applied to that degree plan. Commissioner?
If I could just call out also, so David and I have a couple of jobs ago for each of us when we were at UT Austin. So David was one of the pioneers in the work on student success and tracking students' progress to credentials. And there's a whole data analytics team that worked on this. Now, most of our institutions are small. Like 23 of our community colleges have fewer than 5,000 full-time student equivalents. Even most of our university systems don't have this capability to track students' progress to a credential. So part of the idea is to reset the baseline. So you can be in the smallest college in Texas, and you can still be able to see this kind of data that used to be only the larger research universities or the larger community colleges had the kind of analytics team to see the kind of data that you can see now. So it's resetting the baseline for how folks can work with their own data and put it in that broader context of what's idiosyncratic to me versus what do they see across this, what's going on with my peers.
Yeah, if we can track the percentage of credits, usable when they transfer, that's huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't know if you can overlay student debt into that equation, because obviously on the student debt side, we're sensitive to student debt associated with usable credits.
Absolutely. And we can also, it's unlimited opportunities for us to think about, did a student repeat a course that they'd already taken as successfully at a 2-year? The time to degree, debt, like you mentioned. There's a number of things that we could explore to help streamline this process so there's no more ambiguity.
It was very exciting.
Yeah.
Dr. Troutman, a question on the previous slide.
Mhm.
Is this saying that only 35% of our engineering students across the state who enroll in four-year institutions complete in 4 years?
Can you go to, okay, there you, thank you. Let's see here. I want to make sure the timing. So when I filtered on the core years of 15, 16, 17, 18. Yes.
Okay.
So this is statewide.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
So this,
statewide, if you enroll in engineering in a four-year institution, 35% graduate with their engineering degree 4 years later.
in a 4-year time.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that number will dramatically increase when we click on 6-year. I wish I had my laptop so I could show you. It just show you that timing. It will probably, my hypothesis would be that it would probably be around 60% at 6 years. It's going to be much higher. It's just that 4-year component. How do we get students ready for college?
But this is a really critical question because so with engineering is one of the higher projected lifetime earnings kind of majors. You're going to see similar patterns across different majors, and there's a huge difference in the ROI for different degrees if a student takes 5 years or 6 years to graduate versus 4 years and they're already out into the marketplace. And so it's the student debt and the costs of attending, but it's really the opportunity costs that are the largest costs of college here that we're going to shine a light on, like how many students are actually completing. We've got recommended course sequence that says you can complete in 4 years. How many students are actually completing their programs within 4 years versus 5 or 6?
And I think, yeah, with recommended course sequencing, I'm really interested in the first year experience. So that we'll have the recommended course sequencing for engineering. Well, how many students, when they step foot on a campus because they want to be an engineer, how many students are 2 semesters behind before they even start? Because they don't have the right math courses. We can start telling that now. We can start telling that story to understand the readiness that takes place. Because if the recommended course sequencing your first semester is Calculus 1, but you've just, in high school, you took Algebra 2, you're going to have to take pre-cal college algebra. You have to take something to get prepared for that Cal 1. Otherwise, you're going to fail. And so there'll already be a semester or 2 semesters behind. And so that's why I think it's an important question about the difference between 4-year, 5-year, and 6-year graduation rates and the ROI with that. With engineers, like Commissioner Keller had mentioned, the ROI is much greater for engineers. So I'm not as concerned about 6-year graduation rates. I'm more concerned about some popular majors like psychology or sociology and time to degree that could impact debt to income ratios and the ROI.
Can you also,
As an engineer that graduated, and it took more than 4 years to graduate, I would say that, one of the things that we try to encourage, at least at Texas Tech, is to make sure that they have internships. So I would not be too focused on trying to get them out in 4 years. I want to make sure that they graduate with also the right experience. And the fact that they have an internship will make it most likely that they will have a good opportunity to have a good job. So while 4 years is important, I would say, let's not get too focused on just trying to get them out in 4 years. Let's make sure we get them out 4 years, but prepared.
along the same lines, what about grades, right? So are we pushing kids to get out in 4 years, but their grades are suffering, therefore their preparedness is suffering? Can we track that?
We can track that. So we can filter by GPA and really understand course performance, because we have, that's why I want to zoom out for a second. DMI is so important because we have some of the richest data in the country. And we're setting on this Mount Everest of data. How can we chip away at that mountain to make sure that we're creating right information for the right people at the right time. So absolutely. I'm worried about grade inflation. I'm worried about deflation. I'm worried about there's several things that would keep me up at night. But I think what we can do as an agency is shine a light on these data to be as transparent as possible. I think you bring an excellent point about internships. That's something we have to explore to understand internships, externships, apprenticeships, other data sources that are going to provide a value to make sure that students have that good line of sight of they've completed their coursework. What type of internship would help benefit me in the long run, and what companies are out there. So that's something that is on the roadmap.
Thank you.
Next slide. And next slide. And then this is our labor market outcomes. This is showing you the earnings outcomes for individuals. So this is statewide, aggregated at different major levels. So chemical engineering versus architectural engineering, the list goes on. And it provides you the first year earnings outcomes. We have 1 and 5 year earnings outcomes for individuals. We also have modules in this data set or database on debt to income ratios. How much are students investing with student loans and how does that pay off? And you can select on any major that's offered at that institution. And then you can compare and contrast that with your peers. So that's the power behind this. It's really exciting. All right, I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Moving on to the next slide, wanting to talk a little bit about, in addition to sort of the technology projects that we've talked about and the data products that we've produced, just reflecting a little bit on how David and I have also been focused on investing time and energy into our staff and process improvements in order to keep momentum going on DMI. I think data modernization, it's not a project with a finish line. This is a continual improvement. We're going to continue to collect data. We always have to get better about how we're storing it and provisioning it. So on the business process side, we've invested a lot in sort of project management and continuous improvements on that. Want to really thank Sonia Hartley, our project manager, on that front. We've worked a lot agency-wide on data governance to make sure that we have consistent standards across the agency for how we're collecting and storing data and dealing with data. And then also making sure that we have a process for knowing what data collection our agency is engaged in so that we're fully transparent with all the data that we have. On the human capital side, really investing in staff to attend training. We have an agency-wide subscription to DataCamp so that staff can go in and take whatever trainings they need. We've invested in sort of intensive in-person trainings on some of our new technology projects like Snowflake to make sure that staff across our teams, both in IT and data management, are fully ready to use these new tools to their capacity. And then we've worked really hard to strengthen collaboration between all of our teams on the IT and data side and across the agency. Not listed on the slide, but kind of to what we've been talking about. I also want to call out, like we talked about earlier, just really infusing that data mindset across our agency. And tomorrow you're going to see a presentation from our community college finance team on some of our data products that we've produced on that. That's not strictly a DMI project in the way that, say, the secure data portals are, but I think it's a good example of just how we've continued to focus on and prioritize using data in the agency and everything that we do. And also just want to kind of echo David earlier in expressing deep appreciation for Commissioner Keller for leading on this effort. It's been critical for David and I on this, and really want to say thank you to the board and the legislature for your support on this. It's a significant undertaking and deeply appreciative of the opportunity to work on something of this kind of scope and scale and work closely with David on it.
Thank you both very much. Members, are there any further questions?
I just have one more quick question. Are you tracking how often the institutions are tapping into the data, and how often they're hitting it, what they're doing with it? I mean, and how are you monitoring that?
So we do monitor who's logging in. We do that for security's sake. So we want to make sure that the institutions know that we're not being a big brother in this. We're just understanding the right people have access to the right data. And then Brian Cordeau on the data management research team is really trying to figure out who are our power users so that we could potentially use them as agents in the field to support use of this and use within a campus. So yes, we're monitoring that.
I have one other question. This is Rick Clemmer. So
Mr. Clemmer.
with the information that you're talking about going to be in the cloud, it's clearly at risk for cybersecurity hacking. What kind of cybersecurity protection are you using? I mean, you want to make it available, but you don't want someone to be able to come in and manipulate the data that would then distort the data when people are trying to analyze it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing I'll mention is from an agency governance perspective, in the past, we've operated with an information security officer as part of our IT team. Earlier this year, we shifted that model and we elevated the position and hired a new chief information security officer that reports directly to me in the same way that our CIO does, to make sure that security, because it is so critical, that it has sort of the proper sort of position and of importance within the agency. And our new chief information security officer, Kirk Burns, will be providing an update to the board in October. An executive session, we do that on an annual basis to kind of get into the details of exactly what we're doing from a cybersecurity standpoint. But it is definitely top of mind and critical for us.
Will you be sure that he addresses what solutions being used with the details
Absolutely.
associated with it when he reviews that, please?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
And I would even pose that our data is probably the most secure right now than it's ever been in the history of our agency. By being in the cloud, it's following federal regulations and standards, and there's extra layers of protection, because I know for Sarah and I, if we have a data breach, I'm out of a job, right? So I think about, and then also I want to make sure that we're protecting the privacy of students and making sure we're always FERPA compliant.
Anything further? Thank you both very much. Agenda item 5B is consideration and possible action to adopt the recommendation relating to the certification of gifts that are fundable through the Texas Research Incentive Program for Emerging Research Universities. Miss Emily Cormier, can you tell me? Say it. Cormier, Assistant Commissioner for Funding, will present this item and be available for questions.
Oh, sorry. So I'll be bringing forward the gifts available for certification for Texas Research Incentive Program, or more commonly known as TRIP. So next slide. So we're just providing a bit of an overview regarding this program. So the TRIP was established by the legislature back in 2009, and this was really created to help incentivize our universities to go forth and seek private donations and philanthropy to support their research endeavors. And so to support this goal, the program basically provides state matching funds for gifts made to the institutions for eligible purposes. The gifts are matched through a tiered system where the state dollars increase as the gift amount increases, and gifts must be at least $100,000 to start with, and then it tops out at $10 million. And only emerging research universities in the state are eligible to participate in this program. So on this slide, we've listed the 8 who currently are part of this program. Moving on to the next slide. So since the start of the program, it's been very successful. Since 2010, we've had over $1 billion in gifts that are provided to institutions, and that results in approximately $810 million in eligible state matching funds. And I should say this is a moving target. So basically every day we might receive gifts coming in. So that number does change as gifts continually enter the system. And so you can see from this chart that over time, the legislature has made an investment of approximately $427 million to go towards the state matching funds for this purpose. Those funds are appropriated to the coordinating board, and we distribute it to the institutions basically on like a first gift in, first payment out system. And so while $430 million is a lot of money and has been invested over time, you can see that does leave what's called kind of a backlog of around $382 million in currently eligible state matching funds that have not received appropriations from the legislature for this purpose. So moving on to the next slide. And so, as I mentioned, we're here today to basically certify the next round of gifts that are eligible to receive state matching funds. So gifts are submitted to the coordinating board. It goes through a peer review process and an internal review process to make sure it meets all of the eligibility criteria. And at the end of the day, those gifts have to come forward to the board for certification to then be placed into the queue as state dollars are available for matching. So for this board item, staff recommend the certification of 166 gifts worth $109 million in donations and an associated state match of $93 million. So listed on this slide is the breakdown by institution. So that concludes my remarks. I'm happy to take any questions.
Is the disparity between the percentage of matching funds to gifts just depend on the nature of their qualifying gifts?
So statute dictates based on like the amount of the gift, you get a percentage of state funds. So from 100 to I think 200,000, or sorry, 100,000 to $1 million, you get a 50% state match. From $1 million to $2 million, you get a 75% match. And any gift that's $2 million to $10 million, you would get 100%.
So the difference is just the percentage of gifts in the categories.
Exactly. Yep.
So Emily, for the new board members, can you give a little history? If people look at this, they go, why are only certain universities on the list and not others?
Sure. So statute dictates that only schools that are listed in our accountability system as an emerging research university are eligible to participate in this program. So the state has set up a system of research funds that basically are unique to each type of group of institutions in the state. So we have research universities receive certain types of funding, emerging research receives other, and then, the remaining institutions receive different types of state dollars. So this was a program that was set up specifically for emerging research universities. And our data management and research team does do a review of institutions in the state and kind of categorizes them into peer groups. And so that's something that's actually currently undergoing a review right now that they're working on and should have kind of updated information in the next few weeks or months.
Thank you.
Members, are there any further questions? Is there a motion to adopt?
Just before you do that, could you
Mr.
clarify the challenging part? You had the portion of it had been challenged, and can you explain a little bit more about how the programs are judged and who challenges those and how that takes place?
Happy to. And actually, we do have a rule packet that's coming forward to y'all in just a couple agenda items that actually really lays this out clearly for institutions. So basically, the way the program's been operating is as we get the donations in, we then make those donations and the documentation available to all of the institutions so they have a chance to review it. And basically, they do a peer review and are able to challenge to make sure that this was truly a gift for a research enhancing purpose. So statute lays out that this could be things for like program costs related to research, endowed professorships, and kind of a litany of other items. And so institutions are given the opportunity to challenge each other's donations. And then we also do an internal review cycle to consider the eligibility of the gifts and make sure that they meet all the requirements. Those recommendations then go back out to the institutions who can then appeal into the commissioner to then review the gift and whether it was determined to be eligible. And then he can make a recommendation on that. And then it ultimately comes to the board for consideration.
And once we approve it, it's dependent on funding being available to provide the match.
Exactly.
And so this represents the backlog that's awaiting appropriations.
Yes.
Is there a motion to adopt the recommendation relating to the certification of gifts that are fundable through the Texas Research Initiative Incentive Program for Emerging Research Universities?
Motion.
I have a motion by Mr. Wilson and a second by Mr. Clemmer.
Yes.
Those in favor say aye. Motion passes. Agenda item 5C is consideration and possible action to approve the high demand field list for fiscal year 2023 awards for the purposes of the Community College Finance Program. Ms. Emily Cormier will present this item and be available for questions.
Sure. So as part of the new community college finance model, institutions receive a set dollar amount per credential conferred. And then statute also notes that they should get an additional amount of funding for credentials, excuse me, conferred in what's called a high demand occupation. And so this is basically to incentivize our institutions to focus on those programs that are really most in need for workforce across the state. And so at the last board meeting, we brought forward rules for y'all to consider that would basically set the policy framework for how we would judge an occupation to be high demand in the state. And so as a reminder of what that was, we basically were looking at a mix of statewide and regional needs. So we review federal jobs data and look at what are the top 10 occupations that are fastest growing in the state. And so that becomes our statewide list. We then look at what are the next 5 that are the top growing occupations, not on the statewide, by region. And so those become the regional list. And institutions then eligible to receive this high demand field bonus for their funding based on their credential conferred for anything that's on a regional list or the statewide list. And so what we're doing today is that we've actually, now that we've have the policy framework set in rule, we've been able to implement it into these actual lists that will apply for each year of funding for the community colleges. So this agenda item is for fiscal year 23 credentials, and then the next agenda item will be for fiscal year 24 and 25. Moving forward, we're only going to bring this forward to y'all every 2 years in odd years, but this is kind of like our transition into the new funding model. And so I'll note that this list was put together at the beginning of this year, so institutions can report their FY23 awards to us using a list. We've then defined it for the FY24-25, so you'll see a couple differences on the next agenda item, which I'll talk through. But this is one area of community college finance that's really evolving, and we're constantly looking at to make sure we're capturing really the right data sets and really getting into what the purpose of that legislation was. So that concludes my remarks. I'm happy to take any questions.
Members, are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve the high demand field list for fiscal year 2023 awards for purposes of the Community College Finance Program? I have a motion by Dr. Frias. Second?
Second.
Second by Dr. Wong. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion passes. Agenda item 5D is consideration and possible action to approve the high demand field list for fiscal year 2024-25 awards for purposes of the Community College Finance Program. Ms. Emily Cormier will present this item and be available for questions.
Okay, so this list is for FY24-25 credentials. And so the few key changes from the FY23 list are that we were able to go back and include teaching occupations. So federal data classifies teaching as something that requires a bachelor's degree. And so therefore it was excluded from our FY23 list. However, after further review, we were able to include it based on our rules allowing us to add occupations that require a certification delivered by at least one community college. And additionally, we did receive feedback from the field regarding the demand for this occupation. And we've also applied a more complete list of licensed or apprenticed occupations that we received after working with the Texas Workforce Commission. So this causes some changes on the list to include occupations that federal data may require as only requiring a high school degree, but really our community colleges provide the training for someone to be able to receive the certification for this area. So that could be something like welding. And so that concludes my remarks. I'm happy to take any questions.
Members, are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve the high demand field list for fiscal year 2024-2025 awards for purposes of the Community College Finance Program? I have a motion by Mr. Navarez, second. Second by Dr. Wong. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no.
Aye.
Motion passes. Agenda items 5E through 5H2 were approved on consent. Agenda items 5H3 is consideration and possible action to adopt proposed amendments to board rules, Chapter 13, Subchapter S, Sections 13.553 through 555, and new Section 13.559 concerning the base tier, performance tier, and the rates of the Community College Finance Program. Members, you have supplemental materials for this item printed on goldenrod paper.
So we've got a brief few slides that we're going to use to walk you through this agenda item and then the next one related to 13U. Basically, I like doing a 2-for-1 in all of my comments. But because this topic is so dense and really technical with regards to how we are implementing the community college finance program, we thought it would be helpful just to have this kind of slides to walk through what the rules are really implementing. So moving to the next slide. So just to set the stage where we are with community college finance, as Sarah Keaton mentioned, y'all will be hearing tomorrow in more detail at the board meeting regarding where we're at. So this is really just kind of a high level look and what the rules are doing. But we have gone ahead and provided to our institutions all of their fiscal year 2025 funding appropriation amounts that they should expect to receive using the policy frameworks that y'all have adopted in your previous board meetings for the rules related to this program. So when we adopted the structure in the last board meeting, there were still a few key areas that were missing as we were trying to finalize all of the data and figure out, how this was all going to piece together and work to make a really truly modern dynamic system. So we'll be going through those today. So moving to the next slide. So 13S and 13U really implement a few key areas related to our community college finance reform. So we're going to be making permanent that performance funding accounts for 95% of the finance in the system, leaving 5% for the base tier. And just as a reminder, the base tier is really crucial for our small and rural institutions in the state. So this kind of makes sure that while we're really prioritizing performance, we're making sure those institutions don't get left behind over time. And then additionally, these rules really lay out how we're going to be doing our forecasting of outcomes in future years, and then how we couple that with a dynamic payment system so we're able to basically settle up institutions to the outcomes that they actually deliver over the next few years. And this was really the key piece of House Bill 8, really linchpin of the system, that we wanted to take away this kind of old system where we were funding on a point in time snapshot of, contact hours delivered, and actually really truly make it, responsive to the work of the institutions on an ongoing annual basis. So moving to the next slide. So within 13S, there were the two main revisions. The first was, as I mentioned, the 95% to 5% codification. And then secondly, we've included the actual weights and rates for each of the fundable outcomes in our system. And so what we've done here is we've listed out all of those fundable outcomes. And then as a reminder, additional funding for outcomes delivered to students who are economically disadvantaged, academically disadvantaged, or adult learners. And then those outcomes are multiplied by a set dollar amount to determine how much funding an institution will receive. And so at a high level, our policy approach to the weights and rates set out in rule was to generally maintain the same ones that we used in FY24. And this was really to be responsive to kind of the legislative requirement of providing stability for our institutions. So they know what outcomes they're trying to achieve, and they know how much they're going to get paid if they do that. And so there were a few key revisions to point out. So funding for the achievement of 15 semester credit hours of dual credit was increased to match the rate provided for transfer to a four-year institution or the receipt of an associate or bachelor's degree. So we've basically equalized funding across those different groups of outcomes. We've also equalized the funding rates for all short-term workforce credentials in the model. And then we've included new funding rates for outcomes that were basically added for FY25. So this would include those third-party credentials, which were funded at the same level as other short-term workforce credentials, Opportunity High School Diploma, which is funded at the same level as achievement of an associate's degree, and then finally the rates for the new credential value premiums. And these are set at 25% of the rate of the amount institutions receive for the credential to which they apply. So for associates, there's a 25% bonus that schools can receive if their graduate completes the credential more quickly or in a lower cost manner. So moving to the next slide. Here's where we move into Chapter 13U of your meaty rule packet. And this is basically where we're laying out the dynamic system. So as I mentioned, one of the main purposes of House Bill 8 was to modernize the system and pay institutions on an ongoing regular basis using more current up-to-date information. So the structure of the rules basically creates a forecasting mechanism to estimate future performance and partners that with a settle-up mechanism or dynamic payment system to align actual payments to outcomes achieved as we get more current data in. So our model works by funding institutions at the better of the fiscal year in which outcomes will be achieved, so upcoming FY25 or a 3-year average of FY23 to FY25. Well, at this point in time, our agency only has data up to FY23. So how are we supposed to set their funding level for the next fiscal year? Well, we've created a statistical model that basically forecasts out each outcome using basically a 6-year time period. And then we've partnered that also with kind of what we're calling guardrails to basically protect against, projections that may be overly optimistic or pessimistic, just given the newness of the model and because we need some time to see really how it works. And so that limits the growth of an individual outcome from exceeding 10% year-over-year increases or a 5% year-over-year decline. So once we apply these guardrails, we're left with the actual FY23 data and forecasted 24 and 25 data that we can then use to set an institution's funding amount for next year. Moving to the next slide. And then, as I mentioned, kind of the next piece of the puzzle is the settle up. So eventually we'll recalculate our funding work based on, so an institution's funded on actual performance rather than forecasted. And so kind of the high level policy of all of the words on this slide is that as we get new data into the agency, we'll redo our model, we'll see how institutions performed. If they did better than what we projected, we'll go ahead and basically be able to make a mid-year payment increase to our institutions in the middle of the year to this. If they're doing worse than we had projected, we'll be able to notify institutions that they need to plan for in their next budget cycle that funding is going to be reduced for the next fiscal year. So basically allowing them time within their budget review and so they can make adjustments to account for that decline in funding. And so that concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to take any questions.
If I could just make one comment just to underline a couple of points that Emily just made. So the challenge that the coordinating board got from the legislature would be how do you adopt rules for a dynamic outcomes-based community college finance system where you're going to be aligned with the goals of the state and aligned with our Building a Talent Strong Texas goals, where the colleges are going to be able to realize the benefit as they improve their performance. But you don't want the funding to bounce around in ways that could be detrimental to the colleges. And so, I do want to call out the great work of our finance team and of our legal team in pulling together a set of rules so that we've got predictability, we have some stability, but we have a dynamic system that's aligned with the spirit of this outcomes-based system. So the bottom line is each college is still funded on their actual performance, their actual outcomes, but we have to use projections so that we can start to make the payments, and then that gets settled up at the back end based on each college's actual performance.
I do have a question.
Dr. Wong.
Yeah, I'm so happy to see that guardrail system to make sure that we have a very stable funding. We got with the new performance criteria for all the community colleges. So do you project that will be, I'm sure you probably will have some community college system, they will fall below that 5%, minus 5%. If it happens, what would be like, are we helping them or it depends on them to beef up their performance next time? Hopefully they will get back to that, get back to performance basis criteria, or is there anything that I'm worried about? If it's a system that will continuing to fall below that performance, what we are going to do? Do we have anything that we will look at that, or just up to the system to correct themselves, right? Is that right?
Yeah. So so the colleges know, here's what the projections are. They can see all the data points. Already our finance team has released a tool that lets the colleges explore sort of what if scenarios. So you can see on our website, if you want to play around with that, there's where they could say, well, if we could improve our performance on this outcome measure, how would it change the funding we'd receive? Within DMR, the team is also working on a module for community college finance. So as soon as the colleges submit their data, they'll also be able to see dynamic estimates of what the implications would be. So the colleges have plenty of notice about what the potential implications could be they have also tools available from the agency they can use to as they're budgeting and they're working on their strategy. And then depending on what the issue is, if they're considering how they might improve their workforce education programs, of course, we're providing direct support for the colleges on workforce education, providing them labor market data, providing direct support for the colleges through Associate Commissioner Lee Rector's area on how they can improve their workforce programs. If they have a student success issue, we have a whole set of initiatives that we've stood up in our student success division with Assistant Commissioner Jenny L. Strother. So we do have a number of resources that the colleges can tap into depending on what the levers are that they're trying to pull. But to your point, Mr. Wong, at some point, this is all settled up. And if your performance is declining, it could actually mean that you owe money back.
Well, my comment is because the state is so big, so if different region have different issue, but we have one criteria, so to speak. So I guess in the future, we'll continue to work with the community college association, and if it needs to be, we will revise things up to, depends on what the comments from all the other system. When we implement this new rules, I guess we can always do that, so.
Yes, absolutely. And we are definitely working really hard on kind of our stakeholder feedback mechanisms. We've been holding hours for institutions all summer so they can come and ask questions about the finance model. But we're really trying to also work with them to figure out what tools do you need? What is helpful? We've done what we think is helpful for them, but we're always responsive, try and work with them, and really work on our communication to make sure it's known by the institutions at all levels. Here's where you're looking, y'all really need to take a holistic look at it there, and see what we can do to support our colleges. Cause it's a really big change. It's going to be, a few years to really get in and see how they really react and respond to everything. Yep.
Members, any further questions? Is there a motion to adopt proposed amendments to Board Rules, Chapter 13, Subchapter S, Sections 13.553 through 55, and new Section 13.559 concerning the base tier, performance tier, and the rates for the Community College Finance Program? I have a motion by Dr. Wong, second. Second by Mr. Navarez. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no.
Aye.
Motion passes. Agenda items 5H4 was approved on consent. Agenda items 5H5 is consideration and possible action to adopt new board rules, Chapter 13, Subchapter U, Sections 13.620 through 630, concerning timeline of payments, methodologies, and processes necessary to calculate state formula funding for public community colleges.
And so this is the second part of the rules we just went over.
Members, is there a motion to adopt new board rules, Chapter 13, Subchapter U, Sections 13.620 through 630 concerning timeline of payments, methodologies, and processes necessary to calculate state formula funding for public community colleges? May I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson and Mr. Clemmer, any discussion? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Motion passes. Agenda items 5H6 is consideration and possible action to adopt proposed amendments to Board Rules, Chapter 15, Subchapter A, Section 1510, concerning the administration of the Texas Research Initiative Incentive Program. Ms. Cormier will present this item and be available to answer questions.
Sure. So as I mentioned, have a few amendments that we're making in the rules relating to the administration of the TRIP. So just as a reminder, this is the one that provides the state matching funds for eligible institutions for gifts made to them. So the amendments basically clarify the program administration, but there are a few key areas I just want to point out. So as we talked about in TRIP, once a gift is submitted to us, it undergoes a peer review process whereby the other institutions can challenge them. And then internally, they're reviewed as well by staff, and then decisions are made available to institutions. They're then allowed to appeal recommendations to the commissioner, and then ultimately those gifts come before the board. So we really actually laid that out in rule. Before that was a business practice, but now we wanted to codify it so institutions have clarity on exactly how the process works. And the revisions also provide the general timeframe in a fiscal year for when this review process is anticipated to occur, so institutions can plan workload. And we've also included a new definition of what we're calling administrative corrections. So we're giving institutions an opportunity where they can provide supplemental information to better clarify through supporting financial documents or other information that a gift is eligible during the review process. And this is really being done to minimize the potential that a gift is disqualified due to a clerical error versus actually not being an eligible gift. And then finally, based on feedback from the institutions, we've lengthened the amount of time by which schools may submit a gift to us from 60 days of or 30 days of receipt to 60 days. And we did use negotiated rulemaking to develop these rules, and no public comments were received. And so additional thing to note is that we are recommending amendment in the rules after publication to the Texas Register to just clarify that we can seek those administrative corrections during the review of applications and not just the appeals process. And that concludes my remarks. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Is there a motion to adopt proposed amendments to Board Rules Chapter 15, Subchapter A, Section 1510, concerning the administration of the Texas Research Incentive Program? I have a motion made by Dr. Frias. Any second? Second by Mr. Navarez. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye. Opposed, no. Motion passes. Agenda items 5H7 is consideration and possible action to adopt new board rules, Chapter 22, Subchapter R, Sections 22, 360 through 369, concerning the Nursing Student Scholarship Program. Dr. Charles Quintero Poles, Assistant Commissioner to the Student Financial Aid Programs, will present this item and be available to answer questions.
There we go. Thank you. I'm pleased to present the results of the negotiated rulemaking regarding Chapter 22, Subchapter R, relating to the Nursing Student Scholarship Program. This is one of 3 nursing-related items proposed for this board meeting, all of which stem from actions taken during the 88th legislative session. The Nursing Student Scholarship was created by the legislature in 1989, but has not been funded for several biennia. The legislature appropriated $12.5 million for the current biennium to restart this program. Generally, the proposed rules create a need-based scholarship program for students pursuing vocational, undergraduate, or graduate training in nursing at Texas colleges and universities. Given the number of institutions and types of students eligible to participate in this program, we wanted to design the rules to provide institutions with flexibility to support their particular student populations. We also wanted to design it in ways that would be familiar to institutions. So you'll see things that are quite similar to our other core state grant programs like Texas Grants, as it relates to certain eligibility requirements, the allocation methodology, and the grant amount. Ideally, this will help make implementation easier for our institutional partners when they can begin offering scholarships if these rules are approved. Designing the program in this manner was possible due to statutory changes made by Senate Bill 25 that gave the coordinating board more flexibility in administering the program. I will note that despite the similarities, this scholarship does have some separate items to it, one being that it is meant to be additive to our core programs. Students may receive, for example, funding through both the Texas Grant and the Nursing Student Scholarships, but the rules specify that institutions may not use the Nursing Student Scholarships to replace their financial obligations to students receiving TEOG or Texas Grants. There was a change made to the proposed rules in response to public comments. The rules published in the Texas Register limited the program scope only to undergraduate students, but the rules before you have been expanded to include graduate students as well. The rules still direct institutions to prioritize offering scholarships to individuals who have not yet received their RN licenses. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about these rules.
Members, does anyone have any questions?
A quick comment. The question is, what was the question that came up in the rule when you put out the questions?
The question that came up, there was a comment received about the fact that the rules were limited, that eligibility was limited just to undergraduate students. And a recommendation was made that the rules also apply to graduate students pursuing nursing. And the statute allows that to occur. And so we modified the rules so that both undergraduate and graduate students are eligible, but that priority goes primarily to undergraduate students, specifically those who have not yet received their RN license.
Yeah, I think that's a good policy because we have such a shortage of nursing students getting into the pipeline as undergraduates is very important. So we don't want to, I would personally would not want to take away for opportunities for students getting in undergraduate nursing programs, although we do appreciate the graduate because we need professors and teachers in the nursing field. But I think that's a really good addition. Thank you.
Members, is there a motion to adopt new board rules, Chapter 22, Subchapter R, Sections 22-360 through 369 concerning the Nursing Student Scholarship Program? I have a motion from Mr. Wilson. Second? Second from Dr. Frias. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye. Any opposed, no. Motion passes. Agenda items 5H 8 through 10 were approved on consent. Agenda item 5H11 is consideration and possible action to adopt new board rules, Chapter 23, Subchapter K, Sections 23-300 through 305 concerning Nurse Loan Repayment Assistance Program. Dr. Quintero-Pulse will present this item and be available to answer questions.
Thank you. I'm pleased to present the proposed rules for Chapter 23, Subchapter K, relating to the Nurse Loan Repayment Assistance Program. With the addition of this program, our health-related loan repayment programs now cover nurses, physicians, and 8 mental health profession specialties. And our education-related loan repayment programs also include nursing faculty. Like the nursing scholarship program I just presented, this program has not been funded for several biennia, but received $12.5 million in appropriation funding during the 88th legislative session. Generally, the proposed rules create a loan repayment assistance program for Texas nurses, with particular emphasis on those who are practicing in rural areas or parts of the state with significant shortages of healthcare professionals. The program is structured to offer loan repayment assistance over 3 years to eligible nurses, with the maximum amount of assistance to be determined annually based on the total funds available and the number of eligible applicants. Vocational, registered, and advanced practice nurses will have separate annual maximums to make the program more responsive to each group's educational costs and potential debt loads. Nurses working part-time are also eligible to receive loan repayment on a prorated basis. Many of the technical details of these rules align quite closely with our other loan repayment programs for health professionals, which will more easily allow us to begin dispersing funds this fall. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about these rules.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Is there a motion to adopt new board rules, Chapter 23, Subchapter K, Sections 23-300 through 305 concerning Nurse Loan Repayment Assistance Program? I have a motion by Dr. Frias. Second? Second, Dr. Wong. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye. Any opposed, no. Motion passes. Agenda item 6 is adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Dr. Wong. Second. Second, Mr. Navarez. Members, those in favor say aye. Any opposed, no. Motion passes. We are adjourned. We will now take a short break to allow staff to set up for the Committee on Academic and Workforce Success meeting.